The Shooting Club Girl. On June 22, 1941, the world changed for millions of Soviet citizens. At 3:15 in the morning, German forces launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. 3 million soldiers crossed the Soviet border. The news reached cities within hours. In Kyiv, a 24-year-old university student named Lyudmila Pavlichenko heard the radio announcement while preparing for her morning classes. She was in her 4th year of studying history at Kyiv University. She had a young son from a previous brief marriage. She had plans for a quiet academic career. All of those plans ended that morning. Within days, Lyudmila made her way to the local military recruitment office. The scene was chaotic. Hundreds of people crowded the building, desperate to volunteer. Men lined up to join combat units. Women were directed toward medical and support roles. When Lyudmila reached the front of the line and told the recruiting officer she wanted to be assigned as a rifleman, they looked at her like she had lost her mind. The recruiter, a middle-aged officer with years of experience, shook his head. "We need nurses," he told her. "You'll serve your country better in a hospital." Lyudmila refused. She wasn't there to bandage wounds. She was there to fight. The officer grew impatient. Other volunteers were waiting. He was about to dismiss her when she said something that made him pause. She told him she had been a member of a shooting club since she was 14 years old. She held a marksmanship certification. She could shoot better than most of the men in the room. The officer didn't believe her. To prove his point and get her to leave, he handed her a rifle, pointed to a distant target outside, and told her to show him. Lyudmila took the weapon, checked its weight and balance, raised it to her shoulder, and fired. The bullet struck dead center. She fired again, another direct hit. The officer's expression changed. Within hours, she was officially enlisted in the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division as a sniper. She had no idea that this single decision would transform her into the deadliest female sniper in recorded military history. The making of Lady Death. Lyudmila's first kill came in early August 1941, near Belyevka in what is now Moldova. Her unit was engaged with German forces advancing through Soviet territory. She had been lying in position for hours, watching enemy movements through her scope. 2 Soviet soldiers were pinned down by German fire and couldn't retreat. Through her scope, she identified a German soldier taking aim at one of the trapped men. She later described the moment in interviews. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. This wasn't a target at a shooting range. This was a human being. She could see his face clearly. For several seconds, she couldn't pull the trigger. Then she saw him fire, and one of the trapped Soviet soldiers fell. Something inside her hardened. She took a breath, adjusted her aim, and fired. The German soldier dropped. After that first kill, something changed in her. The hesitation vanished. She began to see her role clearly. Every enemy soldier she eliminated meant Soviet lives saved. Her skills improved rapidly. She learned to read terrain, to identify the best positions, to remain motionless regardless of weather. She learned to calculate wind, distance, and bullet drop instinctively. Her patience became legendary. Other snipers would take risky shots. Lyudmila would wait for the perfect moment. By December 1941, after just 5 months of combat, she had 187 confirmed kills. The Germans began to hear about her. Stories spread through their lines about a female Soviet sniper who never missed. They called her Lady Death. They put a bounty on her head. They sent counter-snipers specifically to hunt her. None succeeded. Sevastopol, the city that refused to fall. In June 1942, Lyudmila was redeployed to the Crimean Peninsula, specifically to Sevastopol. This reassignment would define the rest of her life. Sevastopol was a crucial strategic target. It was the Soviet Union's largest port on the Black Sea, home to their Black Sea fleet. Hitler wanted it badly. He assigned some of Germany's best units to take it, including the massive siege artillery that had previously destroyed fortresses across Europe. The siege had already been underway for months when Ludmila arrived, but in June 1942, the Germans launched their final massive assault. They called it Operation Sturgeon Catch. Over 200,000 German and Romanian troops surrounded the city. They brought in the heaviest artillery in the Wehrmacht's arsenal, including the famous Dora railway gun, one of the largest artillery pieces ever built. Its shells weighed 7 tons each and could penetrate 30 feet of concrete. The bombardment was apocalyptic. Imagine living in a city where every single day, for months, massive explosions shook the ground constantly. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble in seconds. The air was thick with dust and smoke. The smell of death was everywhere. Fresh water became scarce, food supplies dwindled, medical supplies ran out. Soviet defenders lived underground in a network of tunnels and bunkers. Some of these were ancient, carved centuries earlier. Others were hastily dug as the siege progressed. Soldiers slept in shifts, always ready for the next assault. Above ground, the landscape became unrecognizable. Every street was cratered, every building was damaged or destroyed. Trees were blasted into splinters. In this hellscape, Ludmila went to work. Her role was to eliminate high-value targets, German officers, machine gunners, artillery spotters, and most importantly, enemy snipers. She would leave her bunker before dawn, moving through the ruins to reach her chosen position. Sometimes she would crawl for an hour just to advance 50 meters. She would settle into position and wait, her rifle trained on key areas, watching for any movement. Hours would pass. Artillery would thunder around her. Buildings would collapse nearby. She wouldn't move. Her discipline was absolute. Then, finally, a target would appear. A German officer checking positions through binoculars, an enemy sniper moving between cover, a machine gun crew setting up. She would take a breath, hold it, and squeeze the trigger. The target would fall. Then, she would wait again. The Germans knew she was out there. They tried everything to find her. They sent their own snipers to hunt her. She killed them one by one. They tried to flush her out with artillery. She learned to predict bombardment patterns and moved before the shells arrived. They offered rewards for information about her location. The Soviet defenders protected her identity. Her kill count rose steadily. 200, 225, 250. Each number represented an enemy soldier who would never threaten her comrades again. But the numbers also represented a growing psychological burden that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The man in the scope. Among the Soviet forces defending Sevastopol was another sniper, a man named Alexei Kitsenko. Alexei was several years older than Ludmila, in his early 30s, with experience from earlier campaigns. He was a quiet man, methodical and careful in his work. Like Ludmila, he had proven himself as a skilled marksman. Unlike many soldiers, he didn't boast about his kills or treat sniping as a sport. He understood it as grim, necessary work. They first met during operational briefings in one of the underground command bunkers. Sniper teams would gather to receive intelligence about enemy positions, share observations, and coordinate their activities. In these meetings, Ludmila noticed Alexei. He didn't treat her differently because she was a woman. He didn't make jokes or express surprise at her kill count. He simply treated her as a fellow professional. In the siege environment, where death was constant and tomorrow was never guaranteed, relationships formed quickly. The normal social barriers that existed in peacetime society disappeared underground in Sevastopol. Status, background, age, none of it mattered. All that mattered was competence and trust. Ludmila and Alexei began talking during the brief rest periods between missions. They would sit in the bunkers, sharing whatever food was available, usually just black bread and weak tea. They talked about life before the war. Alexei told her about his family in a small village outside Moscow. He had worked as a factory mechanic before enlisting. He described his mother's cooking, the smell of fresh bread in their kitchen, the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. Simple memories that felt like they belonged to a different universe. Ludmila spoke about her studies, her passion for history, her dreams of becoming a university professor. She told him about her young son, Rostislav, who was being cared for by her mother while she fought. She worried constantly about whether she would ever see him again. These conversations became a lifeline for both of them, brief moments of normalcy in an insane world. As June turned into July 1942, their relationship deepened into something more than friendship. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood romance. There were no grand declarations or passionate moments. It was quieter than that, more essential. It was two people who understood they might die tomorrow, deciding that today, right now, they wanted to be together. They found themselves seeking each other out between missions. When one returned from a dangerous assignment, the first thing they did was check if the other had made it back safely. They started making plans, small ones, because larger plans felt impossible. Maybe after the war, if they both survived, they could visit Alexei's village together. Maybe Ludmila could meet his mother. Maybe they could have a life that didn't involve scopes and killing. A wedding in hell. By late July 1942, the situation in Sevastopol had become desperate. German forces had broken through the outer defenses and were fighting street by street through the ruins. Soviet command knew they would have to evacuate soon. The city couldn't hold much longer. In this atmosphere, with the end approaching, Ludmila and Alexei made a decision. They would marry. It seems almost absurd when you think about it. The city was being systematically destroyed around them. Food was scarce. Water was scarce. Medical supplies were almost gone. Thousands of soldiers were wounded or dying. German artillery never stopped firing. And in the midst of all this, two people decided to have a wedding. But that's exactly what they did. They weren't naive. They both knew the odds of survival were slim. But that's precisely why it mattered. If they were going to die in Sevastopol, and they very likely were, they wanted to die as husband and wife. The wedding took place in late July 1942 in one of the underground bunkers. There was no specific date recorded in official documents. The exact details were lost in the chaos of the siege. But based on various accounts and timing of subsequent events, it was likely around July 20th or 21st. The ceremony was arranged through the military chaplain attached to their division. In Soviet times, religious observance was officially discouraged, but in the trenches, many soldiers found comfort in faith. The chaplain had performed many such wartime weddings, quick ceremonies for couples who knew they had little time. The bunker where they married was lit by kerosene lamps and candles. The air was thick with smoke from poor ventilation. The walls were rough earth and timber supports. You could hear artillery fire constantly, sometimes close enough that dust fell from the ceiling. About a dozen people attended, fellow soldiers from their unit who could be spared from positions. There was no wedding dress, no white gown, no veil. Her boots were caked with mud. Her hands bore small scars from her work. The chaplain spoke briefly about love and commitment, about finding hope, even in darkness. He asked if they took each other as husband and wife. They each said yes. There were no rings to exchange. Such luxuries didn't exist in besieged Sevastopol. The witnesses clapped quietly. Someone produced a bottle of vodka that had been saved for a special occasion, and they shared a toast. The entire ceremony lasted perhaps 10 minutes. When it was over, Ludmila Podlychenko became Ludmila Kitsenko. Then, because the war didn't pause for weddings, they returned to their posts. There was no honeymoon, no wedding night in any traditional sense. Alexei went back to his position covering the northeastern approaches. Ludmila returned to her sector in the southern ruins. They had stolen a few minutes of happiness in hell. it would be all they ever got. 2 weeks. The exact circumstances of Alexei Kivtsenko's death remain unclear.